A human warship arrived without warning. The alien fleet already knew its history. The border system of Threshold Reach was quiet that day, the way a graveyard is quiet. 3 alien fleets sat in an uneasy circle around a dead red star, their ships arranged in wide defensive rings. They were not enemies today. They were something stranger, old rivals who had agreed, for one meeting only, to talk instead of fight. The Kael'th Dominion had sent 12 warships, sleek and dark, shaped like curved blades. The Orinth Concord had sent 9, boxy and heavy, built for defense rather than speed. The smallest group, the Vane Trade Assembly, had sent only 4 ships, but their ships were fast and carried the newest sensors in known space. All 3 powers had gathered at Threshold Reach because of a shared problem. A strange signal had come from deep in unclaimed space, a signal none of them could translate, and each side was afraid the others would claim whatever was sending it before a fair agreement could be reached. Fleet Marshal Thun Sarai stood on the bridge of the Kael'th flagship, the Hollow Tide. She was tall for her species, with gray-blue skin and eyes like polished stone. She had commanded ships for 30 years, and in that time, she had learned patience was worth more than speed. She watched the tactical display, where the icons of allied and rival ships blinked in slow, careful patterns, each fleet staying exactly the correct distance from the others. No one wanted to seem aggressive. No one wanted to seem weak either. "The Orinth delegation is ready to speak," said her communications officer, a young Kael'th named Dessa. "They want to begin the meeting in 1 hour." "Good," Thun said. "Let us hope this hour brings something other than more arguing." She had barely finished speaking when the ship shuddered. Not from an attack, from something else. Something the sensors did not understand. "Marshal, we have a contact," Dessa said, her voice suddenly tight. It appeared out of nowhere. No warp signature, no drive trail, nothing. It's just there. Thun turned to the main screen. A single point of light sat far from the fleets, closer to the dead star than any of them. As she watched, the sensors slowly built a picture of the object. It was a ship, one ship, alone, far larger than anything in Thun's fleet, larger even than the biggest Orinth vessel. Its hull was gray and clean, marked with no decoration, no flags, nothing but a long string of numbers and letters near its bow. "Identify it," Thun ordered. "Working," Dessa said. Her hands moved fast over her console. Then she went still. "Marshal, the database has a match, but it's old, very old." "Show me." The screen changed. A file appeared, its edges worn with age in the way old digital records sometimes look, copied so many times that small errors had crept in. At the top of the file was a single word that made every officer on the bridge go quiet. Ember Class. Below the word was a ship design, nearly identical to the one now sitting silently near the dead star. Beneath the design was a short description, written in the blunt, careful language of a military record. Thun read it once, then read it again, because the first time she could not believe it. "Ember-class heavy cruiser," she read aloud. "Human design. Confirmed combat record. 41 engagements. Confirmed losses inflicted. Catastrophic. Status. Presumed retired from active service, following the Ember War, 312 years ago." No one on the bridge spoke. The silence stretched long enough that the hum of the ship's own systems became loud in Thun's ears. "That is not possible," said her tactical officer, a broad-shouldered Kael'th named Voro. "The humans have not been seen this far from their territory in over a century. Their space is 100 light-years from here. There is no way for one of their ships to simply appear." "And yet," Thun said quietly, "there it is." She had heard the stories, the way every Kael'th officer had heard them, passed down through training records and old campaign histories. 300 years ago, before Thun's grandmother was born, the Kael'th Dominion had been part of a much larger alliance of species that had gone to war with humanity. The details of why the war started were argued over even now, buried under centuries of politics and blame, but the outcome was not argued over. The outcome was written plainly in every military academy, on every Kael'th world. The alliance had lost. Not lost a battle, not lost a campaign, lost the war, badly, in a way that had reshaped the balance of power across a third of known space, and the ships that had done the most damage, The ships whose names still appeared in morning briefings even now, 3 centuries later, were the Ember-class cruisers. "Marshal," Voro said carefully, "should we hail the other fleets?" Thune did not answer right away. She was still looking at the ship on the screen. It had not moved. It had not raised shields that she could detect, had not charged weapons, had not done anything except sit there, quiet and enormous, close enough to the dead star, that its scanners would see every ship in the system with perfect clarity. "Yes," she said finally. "Hail them, all of them, and get me everything the archive has on the Ember War. Everything. I want to know exactly what that ship out there is capable of before I decide what to do about it." Across the system, on the Orinth flagship, a similar scene was unfolding. Admiral Petch Aurelian, a broad, patient officer, who had spent most of his career keeping the peace between quarreling smaller powers, stared at the same contact on his own screen, and felt a coldness settle into his chest that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature controls. "Confirm the identification," he said to his officers, though he already knew what they would say. "Confirmed, Admiral," came the reply. "Human transponder codes, though the format is unusual. It matches no active fleet signature in current records. It appears to be broadcasting an old registry number. Pre-treaty registry." "Pre-treaty," Petch repeated. He had studied the Ember War in his officer training, the way every cadet in the Orinth Concord did, as a lesson in the danger of underestimating a young species. Humanity had been considered minor, even primitive, by the standards of the older Alliance 300 years ago. They had no long history of interstellar war. Their technology, while advancing quickly, had been assumed to be inferior to species who had been building starships for 1,000 years or more. That assumption had been wrong, and the Alliance had paid for it in ships and lives. "Options, Admiral?" asked his second-in-command, a sharp young officer named Riss. "We do nothing rash," Petch said. "We do not know why that ship is here. We do not know if it is armed for war or simply passing through. Humanity signed a peace treaty with what remained of the old Alliance after the Ember War ended. As far as I know, that treaty still holds. This may be nothing more than a single ship, off course, or exploring, or lost. A 300-year-old warship, appearing without warning at the exact moment 3 fleets are gathered to negotiate over an unclaimed signal," Riss said slowly. "That seems like an unlikely coincidence, sir." Petch did not answer immediately, because he privately agreed. He had not survived 30 years of fleet command by believing in convenient coincidences. On the smallest of the 3 fleets, the Vane Trade Assembly, the reaction was different again. The Vane were traders first, and warriors, only when they had no other choice, and their commander, a quick, nervous officer named Captain Ilsa Meth, immediately ordered her 4 ships to pull back to the very edge of the system. "I am not interested in finding out if the old stories are true," she told her crew, watching the human ship on her own display. "Ember class, do you understand what that means? It means one of those ships was recorded fighting off 11 warships at once during the Battle of Coris Drift, and destroying 7 of them before it was even seriously damaged. One ship, 11 against 1, and it walked away." Her weapons officer, a younger Vane who had not grown up with the old stories the way Ilsa had, frowned at the screen. "That must be exaggeration, Captain. No single ship could do that." "I used to think so too," Ilsa said. "But the record survived from both sides of that battle, not just the human side. Our own historians confirmed it independently, because they did not want to believe it either." She kept her eyes on the still, silent shape near the dead star. "I do not know why that ship is here. But I know I do not want to be the one who provokes it." For nearly 20 minutes, the human ship did nothing at all. It sat near the dead star, running what the sensors on all 3 fleets guessed was some kind of long-range scan, sweeping the system slowly and thoroughly. No weapons were charged, no shields were raised beyond a passive baseline. It behaved, if anything, like a ship that expected no danger and intended no harm, which somehow made the watching fleets more nervous rather than less. A warship that came in with weapons blazing could at least be understood. A warship that came in calm and unhurried, confident enough to sit still in the middle of 3 foreign fleets without even bothering to raise its guard, was a different and stranger kind of threat. Then, at last, a single transmission went out from the human ship, broadcast openly on a wide frequency that all 3 fleets could receive at once. It was not encrypted, it was not hidden. It was sent, deliberately, so that everyone in the system would hear it at the same time. The voice that came through was calm, even, and unmistakably human, though the language had been run through a translation matrix that smoothed out most of the accent. This is Captain Elena Voss, of the human warship, Ember 9. Registry designation, Ashwake. We are aware that our arrival may be alarming. We mean no harm to any fleet present in this system. We request a peaceful exchange of communication with the senior commanding officers of each fleet, at their convenience, regarding the signal that has drawn you all to this location. We will hold position and take no offensive action while we await your response. The message ended. On 3 different bridges, in 3 different languages, the same question was asked in different words. Why is a 300-year-old ghost ship, one of the most feared names in 3 centuries of history, calmly asking to talk? Thuan Sarai stared at the still image of the Ashwake on her screen for a long moment, before she finally spoke. Send a reply, she said. Tell them the Kael'th Dominion is willing to talk, but tell our own fleet to remain at full readiness. History does not forgive carelessness, and I do not intend for the Dominion to make the same mistake twice. Behind her, Voro was already pulling up the old campaign records of the Ember War, scrolling through page after page of ship losses, tactical analyses, and survivor accounts, trying to understand exactly what kind of enemy, or ally, had just arrived in their system. The deeper he read, the more his hands slowed, and the more his expression changed from professional caution to something closer to quiet dread. Marshal, he said eventually, without looking up, I think you should see this. What is it? The Ashwake, he said. It's not just any Ember-class ship, according to this record. It's the one that ended the war. Thuan took the tablet from his hands and read the entry herself, slowly, as if reading it a second time in her own voice might make the words less unsettling. The record described a final battle at a system called Chorus Drift, a battle so costly that the old alliance had never fully recovered its military strength afterward, not even 3 centuries later. The ship listed at the center of that battle carried the same registry prefix as the vessel now sitting quietly near the dead star. If this is accurate, Voro said, then the ship out there did not simply take part in the war that broke the old alliance. It ended it, personally. Thuan set the tablet down carefully, as if it might shatter, and turned back to the viewport, where the gray shape of the Ashwake was still visible among the drifting debris of the dead star's ring. She thought of every drill she had ever run as a young officer, every simulation built to prepare Kael'th cadets for the worst-case scenario the Dominion's military planners could imagine. All of them, she now realized, had been modeled loosely on ships, just like the one sitting outside her window. Contact the other fleets again, she said. Tell them what we've found. If they don't already have this record themselves, they deserve to know before this goes any further. Word spread quickly across the 3 fleets in the following minutes, passed along not through official channels, but through the quiet, urgent chatter of officers who could not quite believe what their own historical archives were telling them. On the Orinth flagship, Admiral Petch found himself fielding nervous questions from 3 different department heads within the space of 10 minutes, each one asking some version of the same thing. Was the ship really what the old records claimed? And if so, why had it come now, after 300 years of near-total silence from human territory? Even among the vain, usually more concerned with profit than politics, the mood had shifted. Ilsa Meth found her crew watching the still, silent shape of the Ashwake on the main display, with something close to reverence, the kind of careful respect people reserved for things that could end their lives without effort or warning. It hasn't moved, her weapons officer said quietly, checking the sensors again for what must have been the 10th time. It's just sitting there. That's what worries me most, Ilsa admitted. A ship that dangerous, sitting still, patient, waiting for us to decide what to do. I would almost prefer it attacked. At least then I would understand what was happening. Voro's words hung in the air of the Hollow Tides bridge like smoke that refused to clear. Thuan crossed the deck to stand beside him and looked down at the record he had pulled up. It was old, formatted in the plain style the Kael'th military had used 3 centuries earlier, and the header at the top read, Final Engagement, Ember War, System Designation Chorus Drift. Tell me, Thuan said. Voro took a breath before he spoke, the way officers did when they had to deliver news they did not like. 312 years ago, near the end of the war, the old alliance gathered what remained of its combined fleet for one final push. They believed if they could destroy the human home fleet in a single decisive battle, the humans would be forced to surrender. They gathered 94 warships. It was the largest fleet the alliance had assembled in the entire war. And the humans? 12 ships, Voro said. 12 Ember-class cruisers, commanded by a human officer named, he scrolled, searching, Elena Voss. The name landed on the bridge like a physical blow. Thrun felt her pulse quicken, despite 30 years of discipline that usually kept her calm in any situation. That is not possible, Dessa said from her station. That would make her over 300 years old. Human medical technology by the end of the war was already advanced, Voro said. But even so, 300 years is, he shook his head. I don't have an explanation, Marshal. I only have the record. Continue, Thun said. 94 ships against 12, Voro said. By every calculation the Alliance made at the time, it should not have been close. The Alliance expected to win within hours. Instead, the battle lasted 3 days. When it ended, the Alliance had lost 61 ships. The humans had lost 1. The bridge was silent, except for the quiet hum of the ship's systems. 1 ship out of 12, Thun said slowly. Against 94, and they lost 1. Yes, Marshal. The record states that after the 3rd day, the Alliance commanders sued for peace rather than continue the engagement. The war ended 11 days later, with the signing of the Ashvale Accord. Captain Voss's flagship at the time of that final battle was recorded as the Ashwake, Thun finished quietly. She turned back to the main screen, where the human ship still sat calm and unmoving, near the dead star, exactly as it had for the last half hour. 300 years ago, that ship, or one very much like it, had faced down an entire Alliance fleet and broken it in 3 days. And now it had appeared again, alone, in the middle of a tense standoff between 3 separate powers, and its captain, if the records were true, the very same captain, had simply asked to talk. Marshal, Dessa said carefully, the Orinth Concord has opened a channel. Admiral Petch wishes to speak with you directly, before any of us respond to the humans. Patch him through, Thun said. Petch Aurelian's broad, tired face appeared on the side screen a moment later. He did not waste time with pleasantries. You've read the record, he said. It was not a question. I have, Thun said. I assume you have as well. The Ashwake, Petch said. Voss. I did not believe it when my officers told me. I still am not certain I believe it now, but the transponder codes match historical archives that predate even my grandfather's service. If this is a hoax, it is an extraordinarily convincing one. What is your assessment? Thun asked. Petch was quiet for a moment. My assessment is that we have 3 choices. We can attack it, which given the historical record seems close to suicidal even with our combined fleets. We can ignore it and hope it leaves, which seems unlikely given that it has already requested to speak with us. Or we can do exactly what it asked, and talk, carefully, while keeping our fleets ready in case talking fails. The Vane will not want to fight, Thun said. Ilsa Meth has already pulled her ships back to the edge of the system. A wise woman, Petch said. I am inclined to agree with her instinct, if not her exact positioning. I propose a joint communication. All 3 fleet commanders speak with Captain Voss together, rather than separately. That way none of us can be picked off individually, either in words or in weapons fire, and we all hear the same answers to the same questions. Thun considered this. It was a reasonable plan, and more importantly, it matched her own instinct. Facing an unknown threat divided was how the old alliance had lost the Ember War in the first place, according to every analysis she had ever studied. 94 ships should have been able to coordinate well enough to overwhelm 12. They had failed, partly because the different species in the alliance had not trusted each other enough to fight as one unified force, each commander protecting their own fleet first, and the shared strategy second. Agreed, Thun said. I will contact the Vane. Let us not repeat old mistakes. 20 minutes later, 3 fleet commanders sat before their own separate screens, linked together in a single channel, waiting as the connection opened to the Ashwake. Captain Ilsa Meth had joined reluctantly, her small ship still holding position at the far edge of the system, but she had agreed that a joint conversation was safer than being contacted alone. The screen flickered, and an image resolved. The bridge of the ashwake looked almost disappointingly ordinary. It was clean, efficient, lit with a soft white light, staffed by perhaps a dozen crew members who moved with the quiet competence of people who had done their jobs for a very long time. At the center of the image stood a woman in a simple gray uniform, unmarked except for a small patch on her shoulder that showed a stylized flame. She looked, if anything, unremarkable. Middle-aged by human standards, dark hair pulled back, a calm, patient expression on her face. Nothing about her appearance suggested she was the officer whose name still appeared as a warning in 3 separate species military academies. "Thank you for speaking with me," she said. Her voice was the same calm, even tone the fleets had heard in her earlier broadcast. "I understand my arrival caused some concern. I apologize for that. It was not my intention to alarm anyone." "You are Elena Voss," Thune said. It was not really a question, but she needed to hear it confirmed. "I am," the woman said simply. "The historical record we have access to states that you commanded the human fleet at the Battle of Caris Drift, 312 years ago," Petch said. "If that record is accurate, that would make you considerably older than any known member of your species should be able to survive." Something that might have been a small, tired smile crossed Voss's face. "It's a fair question, and I understand the suspicion behind it. I won't pretend the answer is simple. Human medicine changed a great deal after the Ember War ended, partly because of things we learned during the war itself, and partly because the peace that followed gave us time to focus resources on problems other than fighting. I am, yes, considerably older than a human captain would normally be. I am not going to explain the details of how, not because I don't trust you, but because it is not relevant to why I'm here today, and it would take longer to explain than any of us have time for right now." "Then tell us why you are here," Ilsa Meth said, speaking for the first time, her voice tight with the effort of staying calm. "Your kind has not been seen this far from human space, in longer than I have been alive, and now you arrive, alone, at the exact system where 3 fleets happen to be gathered." "That is not entirely a coincidence," Voss admitted, "though it is also not the trap I suspect some of you are worried it might be." She gestured, and the display beside her changed, showing a star chart with a single point marked in red, deep in unclaimed space beyond the current system. 3 weeks ago, human long-range sensors detected the same signal that appears to have drawn all of you here. We do not know what it is either. What we do know is that the signal's pattern matches something in our own oldest records, from before humanity had left our home system at all. It may be nothing. It may be something important. I was sent, alone, to investigate quietly, and to make contact with whoever else might be investigating the same signal, before the situation became something none of us could easily undo. "Alone," Voro said skeptically. "A single ship, sent to investigate an unknown signal in contested space, with no support fleet." "Humanity is smaller than it once was in terms of active warships," Voss said, and there was something in the way she said it that made Thune pay close attention. "The Ember War cost us a great deal, even in victory. We have spent 3 centuries rebuilding, and most of that rebuilding was not military. We chose, after the war, to keep our combat fleet small, deliberately. A single ship, sent quietly, was judged less likely to cause alarm than a fleet. I will admit, watching your reactions, that this judgment may have been slightly optimistic." There was a pause, and then, unexpectedly, Petch let out a short, surprised laugh. "That may be the understatement of the century, Captain." "Perhaps," Voss said, and for the first time, something like real warmth touched her voice. "I would like to propose something practical, if I may. Whatever this signal is, it is unclaimed by any of us, and it may concern all of us. Rather than each power racing to reach it first, and risking a confrontation none of us actually want, I propose a joint approach. My ship carries scanning equipment that none of your fleets currently have, developed after the war, specifically for investigating unknown phenomena safely. In exchange, your combined fleets carry more firepower than my single ship, in case whatever is out there turns out to be dangerous, rather than merely mysterious." Thune exchanged a glance with Petch through the split screen, and saw her own uncertainty mirrored in his broad face. It was Ilsa Meth who spoke first, her traitor's instincts apparently overriding her fear. You are proposing an alliance, Ilsa said, between the four of us, after 300 years of near silence. I am proposing a temporary cooperation, Voss corrected gently. For one task. Whether it becomes anything more than that is not for me to decide alone, and frankly, it is not really my decision to make at all. That would be a conversation for your governments and mine, one that is well above my authority as a single ship's captain. Thuan studied the calm, unremarkable-looking woman on her screen, the same woman who had, 300 years ago, broken the back of an alliance fleet 8 times the size of her own and ended a war that had reshaped the galaxy. She thought of the warning briefings, the training simulations built around the Battle of Coris Drift, the quiet dread that had settled over her own bridge, less than an hour earlier when the ashwake had first appeared. And she thought of how, in all that time since the ship's arrival, it had done nothing but sit quietly and ask, politely, to talk. I want to see this signals data first, Thun said finally, before I agree to anything. Of course, Voss said, and nodded to someone off-screen. I'll transmit everything we have. I think you'll find it is stranger than any of us expected. As the data began transferring across the channel, Thun allowed herself, for just a moment, to wonder what kind of history had shaped a woman who could win the deadliest war in 3 centuries, and then spend the following centuries choosing, again and again, to ask before she acted. It did not match the stories. It did not match the warnings drilled into every Kael'th officer since childhood. She was beginning to suspect the stories had never told the whole truth. While the data transferred, Voro busied himself pulling every scrap of information the Dominion archives held on the Ashvale Accord, the treaty that had ended the Ember War. Most of it was dry, procedural language, borders drawn, reparations agreed, weapons restrictions imposed on both sides. But buried near the end of the document was a clause that caught his attention, a section describing an agreement between the surviving powers to establish a shared registry of dangerous, unclaimed phenomena discovered near contested space, so that no single power could weaponize such a discovery without the knowledge of the others. Marshal, he said, the treaty already accounts for something like this. There's a clause requiring joint disclosure of exactly this kind of signal, if it's found near contested territory. Then Voss is not proposing anything outside the treaty, Thun said slowly. She's proposing we actually honor it, 300 years later, the way it was originally written. It seems that way, Voro admitted, though I doubt many current officers, myself included until 5 minutes ago, even remembered that clause existed. Thun found that thought more unsettling than reassuring. If a single clause buried in a centuries-old treaty had been quietly forgotten by an entire generation of Dominion officers, she wondered how much else about that old piece had been allowed to fade from memory, replaced instead by simpler, more dramatic stories about humanity's ruthlessness in war. It was easier, she supposed, to remember the fear than the fine print. The joint channel crackled back to life as Petch and Ilsa finished their own review of the transmitted data. Ilsa in particular looked troubled, her quick eyes scanning figures that clearly did not add up the way she expected. The dating methods disagree with each other by nearly 4,000 years, she said. That should not be possible with instruments this advanced. Either our sensors are malfunctioning, or whatever built that structure is old enough to break our assumptions about how such things normally decay and register. That was my science team's conclusion as well, Voss said. We do not have an explanation yet. It's part of why I believe this deserves careful, cooperative attention rather than a race to claim it first. Assuming, Petch said carefully, that a race to claim it first was ever a realistic option for any of us, against a fleet with your history. Voss's expression did not change, but something in her posture shifted, a small, tired weight settling briefly across her shoulders before she answered. I would rather not be the deciding factor in this conversation, Admiral. I did not come here to remind anyone of what my ship is capable of. I came here hoping that would not need to matter at all. The data that came through from the ashwake was, as Voss had promised, strange. Thun and her officers spent nearly an hour studying it before she called the other commanders back to the joint channel. The signal, whatever it was, came from a small, cold planet with no atmosphere, orbiting a star that had no other planets at all, which was unusual enough on its own. Buried under the planet's surface was something built, not natural, radiating a slow pulse of energy in a pattern that did not match any known technology, alien or human. It was old. Every method of measurement they tried agreed on that much, though the exact age varied wildly depending on which method was used, which was itself strange, since normally different dating methods agreed closely with each other. It could be a beacon, Voro said during the private discussion before the joint call. Or a warning. Or a weapon. We simply do not have enough information. Which is exactly why Voss wants a joint approach, Thune said. Whatever it is, no single fleet should face it alone, and no single fleet should claim it alone either. The joint call reconvened an hour after the data exchange, and this time the mood among the four commanders was different, less suspicious, though not yet fully trusting. Thune noticed that Ilsa Meth had moved her ship slightly closer to the rest of the fleet during the data review, no longer holding position at the very edge of the system. I've reviewed the data your ship provided, Petch said to Voss. My science officers agree it does not match any known threat pattern. That said, agreeing to explore it together is a larger decision than any of us were prepared to make when we arrived at Threshold Reach this morning. I understand, Voss said. I am not asking any of you to commit your full fleets today. I am asking for a small joint scouting group, drawn from each of our forces, to travel to the signal's location together and gather more information before any larger decision is made. Small enough that no one risks much, large enough that no one is alone. It was, Thune had to admit, a careful and reasonable proposal. It was also, she suspected, exactly the kind of proposal a person builds a reputation for making after 300 years of learning from mistakes. She was about to speak when her tactical display flashed a warning, sharp and sudden. Marshal, Voro said, his voice tight. Unidentified contact. Entering the system at high speed. It's broadcasting Kael'th military codes, but they're not current. They're old codes. Splinter faction codes. Thune's stomach tightened. She knew exactly what that meant. There was a faction within the Kael'th Dominion, small but violent, that had never accepted the peace that ended the Ember War, that still believed the old alliance should have fought to the last ship rather than surrender. They called themselves the Unbroken, and they had spent decades launching small, deniable attacks against targets they believed represented weakness or betrayal. Thune had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that they would not know about this meeting. Identify the ship, she snapped. Single vessel, heavily modified. Reading weapon signatures consistent with an old Kael'th heavy cruiser, but with significant upgrades. It's powering weapons now, Marshal. It's not slowing down. On the joint channel, the other commanders had gone quiet, watching the same alarming data appear on their own screens. Marshal Thune, Petch said carefully, is this one of yours? No, Thune said, her jaw tight. It is not sanctioned by the Dominion. It is a splinter faction. Extremists who never accepted the peace. I did not expect them here. The unidentified ship was closing fast, its weapon signature growing sharper on every fleet's sensors as it powered toward full combat readiness. It was heading, Thune realized with a chill, directly toward the ashwake. They're targeting the human ship, Voro said. Of course they are, Thune said grimly. To the Unbroken, nothing would prove their old grievance faster than dealing a killing blow for the very ship that ended the war 300 years ago. It would be a symbol to them, regardless of the cost. Recommend immediate intercept, Voro said. We can reach firing range before they reach the ashwake, if we move now. Thune hesitated only a moment before giving the order. Do it. All Kael'th ships, move to intercept. I will not let a splinter faction drag the Dominion into a war we did not choose. But even as her fleet began to move, she watched her sensors and realized they would not arrive in time. The Unbroken ship was faster than expected, its weapons already charging toward full power, and it would reach effective firing range of the ashwake several minutes before any Allied ship could reach it. Captain Voss, Thune said urgently over the open channel, an unauthorized Kael'th vessel is approaching your position with hostile intent. It is not sanctioned by my government. My fleet is moving to intercept, but we will not arrive in time. I recommend you take evasive action immediately. On the screen, Voss did not look alarmed. If anything, she looked mildly regretful, the way a person looks when confirming something they had hoped would not happen, but had not entirely ruled out either. Thank you for the warning, Marshal, she said calmly. We see it, we'll handle it. Captain, That ship is. I know what it is, Voss said, not unkindly, cutting her off. Please, hold your fleet's approach. I do not want anyone hurt trying to reach us in time. We can manage this. Across the system, every sensor on every Allied ship watched as the unbroken vessel closed the final distance and opened fire. Dozens of weapons discharges lit up the tactical displays at once. A full alpha strike from a heavily modified cruiser. More than enough firepower to seriously damage or destroy most ships in known space. The Ashwake's shields absorbed the entire barrage, without so much as flickering on the sensor readout. For a long, stunned moment, nobody on the joint channel spoke. Then, the Ashwake moved. It did not charge forward aggressively, the way Thune's training had taught her a warship should respond to an attack. Instead, it simply repositioned, smooth and unhurried, sliding to a new angle, relative to the attacking ship, with a precision that suggested its pilot, or its systems, had already calculated exactly where it needed to be. A single weapons discharge left the Ashwake, precise and narrow, and struck the unbroken cruiser's engine section. The enemy ship went dead in space, its weapons and engines both offline, drifting silently where a moment before it had been charging toward what its crew had clearly believed would be a historic, symbolic victory. Life signs aboard the enemy vessel remained stable, came a report from the Ashwake's crew, relayed over the open channel, apparently for the benefit of the watching fleets. No fatalities. We have disabled their weapons and propulsion. They are not currently a threat. Voro stared at his own readouts, his expression somewhere between professional shock and something close to awe. One shot, he said quietly. One shot. And she disabled a fully armed, upgraded heavy cruiser, without killing anyone aboard it. Thune found she had been holding her breath, and let it out slowly. On the joint channel, she saw Petch's broad face had gone slightly pale, and even Ilsa Meth, usually so quick to speak, had gone silent. Captain Voss, Thune said finally, that display of restraint was not what I expected. We could have destroyed them, Voss said simply. It would have been easier, honestly. Disabling a ship precisely, without killing its crew, takes more control and more risk than simply overwhelming it with force. But 300 years ago, we learned a hard lesson about what happens when the only tool you use is total destruction, even against people who deserve to be stopped. It creates more of the very anger that started the fight in the first place. So now, when we have a choice, we choose the harder path. We stop the threat. We do not erase the people behind it, not unless there is truly no other way. Thune thought of the training simulations she had grown up with, all of them built around the devastating, overwhelming losses the Alliance had suffered at Chorus Drift. She had always imagined humanity as a species defined by that overwhelming force, that willingness to destroy an entire fleet rather than compromise. Watching the Ashwake now, calmly disabling an attacker without a single casualty, she began to understand that the stories she had grown up with had captured only half of the truth, and perhaps not even the most important half. Aboard the disabled unbroken cruiser, the boarding party Thune sent found a crew of 9, stunned and furious in equal measure, their weapons and engines both dead beyond any quick repair. Their commander, an older Kael'th officer named Bran Ostil, refused to speak at first, glaring at the boarding party with the particular bitterness of someone who believed history had wronged him personally. It was only when Voro mentioned, almost offhandedly, that the Ashwake's captain had disabled them without a single casualty aboard, that Ostil's composure finally cracked. They could have killed us, he said, disbelief plain in his voice. 90 seconds of sustained fire, full power, and not one of my crew is dead. Why would they show us mercy? We attacked them. Perhaps, Voro said, because they decided you did not deserve to die for believing an old story too completely. Or perhaps they simply did not want to give the unbroken a martyr to build a new story around. I imagine either reason would trouble you equally. Ostil had no answer for that, and the boarding party left him and his crew to be transported back to Dominion custody, where a long, uncomfortable set of hearings would eventually determine what became of them. Thune did not envy the tribunal that task would fall to. Punishing men who had grown up soaked in genuine grievance, however badly they had acted on it, was rarely simple. Back on the joint channel, the mood among the 4 commanders had shifted again, subtly but unmistakably. Ilsa Meth, watching the footage of the disabled cruiser drifting silently in space, found herself studying the Ashwake, with something closer to curiosity now than raw fear. "I confess, Captain Voss," she said. "I expected today to end very differently. I expected, at best, a tense standoff, and at worst, a battle none of us wanted. I did not expect restraint of that precision, from a ship with your ship's reputation." "Reputations are built from the worst days," Voss said. "Rarely from the ordinary ones." "I have had a great many more ordinary days than terrible ones, Captain Meth, in 300 years of service. It is simply that the terrible ones are the ones that get remembered and retold. That may be true of every species represented in this system today," Petch said quietly, and no one on the channel disagreed. "What will happen to them?" Petch asked, gesturing toward the disabled unbroken cruiser. "That is not our decision," Voss said. "They attacked under Kael'th military codes, even if unsanctioned ones. I believe that makes it Marshal Thune's decision, not mine." Thuon considered the drifting ship for a long moment. 300 years of grievance, still simmering beneath the surface of her own people, still capable of nearly causing exactly the kind of disaster the peace treaty had been designed to prevent. She thought about how easily this could have become something far worse, a spark that reignited an old war everyone had told themselves was long over. "Board it," she said finally. "Take the crew into custody. They will answer to the Dominion for this, not to violence from either side. And Captain Voss." She turned back to the screen. "Thank you. For your restraint, and for your patience with my people's oldest and angriest ghosts." "We have our own ghosts, Marshal," Voss said quietly. "More than you might think. I understand better than you'd expect what it costs to carry a war that long after it's supposed to be over." Something in the way she said it made Thune pause, made her wonder exactly what 300 years of carrying that particular weight had cost the calm, unremarkable-looking woman on her screen. But there would be time for that question later. For now, there was a captured ship to secure, and a joint scouting mission to plan, and the beginning, however fragile, of something that might finally replace 3 centuries of suspicion with something better. The days that followed the attack were busy ones, across all 3 fleets. The captured unbroken crew was transferred to Kael'th custody, sullen and unrepentant, insisting even under questioning that they had done nothing wrong, that the old war should never have ended in surrender. Thuon listened to their reports with a heavy heart, knowing that stamping out that kind of belief would take more than one arrest, more than one failed attack. But for now, the immediate danger had passed, and the 4 fleets, an unlikely gathering of old rivals and one ancient, unexpected guest, turned their attention back to the signal waiting for them in unclaimed space. Before the joint scouting mission could begin, though, Thuon found herself with a request she had not expected to make. She asked Captain Voss for a private conversation, away from the joint channel, away from the careful diplomatic language that colored every exchange between fleet commanders who did not yet fully trust one another. Voss agreed without hesitation, and the 2 women spoke alone, ship to ship, with no one else listening. "I want to understand something," Thucine said, once the channel was secure. "The stories I grew up with about the Ember War describe your people as merciless, overwhelming force, no mercy, no restraint. That is not what I have seen since your ship arrived. I do not understand the difference." Voss was quiet for a moment before she answered, and when she did, her voice carried a weight that had not been there in the earlier, more formal conversations. "The stories are not wrong, exactly," she said. "They are just incomplete. Humanity did fight without mercy during the Ember War. We fought because we believed, rightly or wrongly, that we had no other choice. The Alliance had already destroyed 2 human colonies before the war reached the point of the Battle of Chorus Drift. Colonies with no military value at all, hit specifically to demoralize us. Whole cities gone. We did not start that war looking for it, Marshal, but by the time it reached its final stages, we fought it as if our survival depended on winning completely, because we believed it did." Thune absorbed this in silence. She had studied the Ember War extensively in her officer training, but the colony attacks Voss described were not something she had ever been taught, not in any of the official Kael'th records. "I did not know that," she admitted. "I'm not surprised," Voss said without bitterness. "History gets edited by the people who write it down, on every side, in every conflict. Your records probably describe a defensive war against an aggressive, overwhelming human military. Ours describe a desperate fight for survival against an alliance that struck first, and struck cruelly. Both versions contain some truth. Neither version contains the whole truth. That is usually how it goes. And after the war ended, Thune said slowly, what happened to the fighting? To the mercilessness, as you called it? We chose to put it down, Voss said simply. Not because the anger disappeared. It didn't. Not for a long time, and some of it never fully went away. Not for the generation that actually fought the war. But we made a decision, as a species, that we did not want to become a people who only knew how to solve problems with total force. We had won the war. We did not want to lose ourselves in the process of winning it. So over the following decades, we rebuilt our military doctrine around restraint, wherever restraint was possible. Overwhelming force remains an option, when there truly is no other choice. But it is the last option now, not the first. That is not an easy thing for a species to choose, Thuen said, especially one that has just won a war that terrible. No, Voss agreed. It wasn't easy. It still isn't, some days. I fought at Chorus Drift, Marshal. I gave the order that destroyed most of that Alliance fleet. I have carried that for 300 years, and I will carry it for however many years I have left. Choosing restraint now does not erase what happened then. It simply means I try, every day, to make sure it does not happen again if I can help it. That is the only kind of penance available to someone like me. Doing better, going forward, with the time that's left. There was a rawness in Voss's voice that Thune had not expected from the calm, composed captain she had spoken with over the past several days, and she found herself, unexpectedly, moved by it. Thank you, Thune said quietly, for telling me that. Thank you for asking, Voss said. Most people, when they finally meet the ghost from their history books, prefer the simple version of the story. It's easier to hate a monster than to understand a person who did monstrous things for reasons that once seemed necessary. I appreciate that you wanted the harder version. When the joint scouting mission finally departed Threshold Reach 3 days later, it looked unlike any fleet formation any of the four powers had assembled in living memory. 2 Kael'th cruisers flew alongside 2 Orinth defense ships, with a single Vane scout running ahead to sweep for hazards, and at the center of the formation, calm and unhurried as always, flew the Ashwake. The journey to the signal's location took 9 days at safe cruising speed, and in that time, something unexpected began to happen among the crews. Officers who had spent their entire careers viewing the other powers as rivals, at best, and threats, at worst, began exchanging information across the joint channel, navigation data, sensor calibrations, even, eventually, small personal conversations that had nothing to do with the mission at all. Voro found himself in a long technical debate with one of the Ashwake's engineers about shield harmonics that stretched across 2 full days, and ended, somewhat to his own surprise, with him admitting the human approach to shield modulation was more efficient than the one the Kael'th Dominion currently used. Ilsa Meth, ever practical, spent much of the journey negotiating what she called future trade considerations with anyone who would listen, apparently already planning for a future where human technology and Vane trade networks might benefit each other, assuming the current cooperation held. Petcharillion, more cautious than either of them, nonetheless found himself impressed by the discipline and quiet competence of the Ashwake's crew, a far cry from the ruthless killing machine his own species' histories had painted humanity to be. Thuen spent much of the journey in quiet conversation with Voss, learning, piece by piece, about the centuries since the Ember War. She learned that humanity's rebuilding had focused heavily on medicine, on infrastructure, on slowly repairing the psychological wounds an entire generation had carried out of that war. She learned that ships like the Ashwake were kept deliberately few in number, maintained as much for their historical significance and their crew's hard-earned experience as for any ongoing military need. She learned, too, that Voss herself had requested this particular mission personally, rather than being assigned to it, because she believed, after 300 years of watching her species retreat further and further from contact with the wider galaxy, that it was time to try, carefully, cautiously, to build something new. I am tired of being a ghost story, Marshal, Voss admitted, on the 8th day of the journey, as the signal's location grew close on the sensors. I am tired of being the reason other species teach their children to fear us. I would like, before whatever time I have left runs out, to be part of something that gets remembered differently. Thune found she understood that feeling better than she might have expected. 3 centuries, and an entire species removed from Voss's own experience. She had spent her career trying to steer the Kael'th Dominion away from the bitterness of the Unbroken, and towards something more stable, more hopeful, and she recognized in Voss's quiet determination something of her own. "Then let us try to build it together," Thu said, carefully, one signal at a time. On the 9th day, the joint fleet arrived at the cold, atmosphereless planet where the mysterious pulse had originated, and every ship in the formation, human and Kael'th and Orinth and Vane alike, slowed together to begin the careful work of finding out exactly what waited beneath its silent, ancient surface. Before that work began, though, there was one more conversation Thun felt she needed to have, this time not with Voss but with her own crew. She called Voro and Dessa to her quarters the evening before the fleet's arrival, wanting to know how the last 9 days had settled in their minds, away from the formal pressure of the joint channel. "I keep thinking about the training simulations," Voro admitted, sitting stiffly across from her. "Everyone I ever ran assumed humanity as the enemy, the worst-case scenario we needed to be ready for. I do not know how to reconcile that with the ship I've spent the last week working alongside. Their engineers are generous with information. Their tactics are careful, almost cautious. It does not match anything I was trained to expect." "Perhaps the training was never meant to teach you who they are," Thun said. "Only what they were, on their worst days, 300 years ago. There is a difference, and I think it took me far too long in my career to understand that difference clearly." Dessa, younger and less burdened by decades of institutional suspicion, spoke more simply. "I like working with them," she said. "I don't have old grudges to unlearn. I just see people who know what they're doing, and who seem to actually care whether this goes well for everyone, not just for themselves." Thun found herself smiling at that, a small, genuine expression she did not often allow herself on duty. Then perhaps that is worth building on, going forward, a generation that does not need to unlearn anything at all, because it was never taught the fear to begin with. The remainder of the journey passed in careful preparation. Reyes, the Ashwake's science officer, shared detailed analysis protocols with his counterparts on the other 3 ships, teaching them, patiently and without condescension, the scanning techniques humanity had developed specifically for investigating unknown phenomena safely. Fessa, the sharp Orinth engineer who would eventually join the landing team, spent long hours cross-checking human equipment specifications against Orinth safety standards, impressed despite herself by how thoroughly the human systems had been tested against catastrophic failure. By the time the fleet slowed into orbit above the small, frozen planet, the wary, suspicious formation that had left Threshold Reach 9 days earlier had become something noticeably different. 4 crews, who had learned, slowly and imperfectly, to trust each other's competence, even if the deeper question of trusting each other's intentions still remained, for most of them, an open one. The planet had no name, only a survey designation, and it looked, from orbit, like nothing more than a gray, frozen stone circling a lonely star. But as the joint fleet settled into position above it, their combined sensors began painting a very different picture beneath its surface, one that made every science officer across 4 different fleets forget, briefly, their old suspicions of one another in favor of shared excitement. "There's a structure down there," reported the Ashwake's chief science officer, a quiet, thoughtful man named Reyes, over the joint channel. Large, buried roughly 200 meters beneath the surface, built from a material none of our scanners can fully identify. "The pulse we detected is coming from its center, and it has been running, based on decay analysis, for somewhere between 8 and 12,000 years. 12,000 years, Ilsameth repeated, her voice hushed. Before any of our recorded histories. Before any of our species had left our home planets, most likely." "That raises an obvious question," Petch said. "Who built it?" "That," Voss said, "is exactly what we're here to find out. Carefully." The joint fleet spent the next 2 days in careful preparation before anyone attempted to go near the structure directly. Sensor drones were sent down first, small and expendable, mapping the entrance and testing for any sign of active defenses or dangerous energy readings. When the drones returned intact and the data showed nothing immediately hostile, a joint landing team was assembled, one representative from each of the 4 fleets, a decision Thun had insisted on despite some grumbling from her own more cautious officers. "If we find something important down there," she had told Voro, "it should belong to all of us, or to none of us. not to whichever fleet happened to reach it first. The landing team descended together in a modified shuttle, Voro, representing the Kael'th Dominion, a sharp, careful Orinth engineer named Fessa, representing the Concord, Ilsa Meth herself insisting on representing the Vane Assembly personally, and Reyes, representing the humans, alongside Voss, who had quietly overridden her own crew's objections to join the team in person. The entrance to the structure, once they reached it, was a smooth archway of the same unidentifiable material the scans had detected, carved with patterns that resembled no known written language from any of the 4 represented species, though Reyes noted with quiet fascination that certain elements of the pattern showed mathematical relationships that felt, in some indefinable way, universal. Whoever built this, he said, running a scanner slowly along the archway, wanted it to be found eventually. Notice how the pulse pattern isn't random. It's rhythmic, almost like counting. I think it's meant to attract attention from anyone capable of detecting it, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. Inside, the structure opened into a single vast chamber, lit by a soft, steady glow that came from the walls themselves rather than any visible light source. At the chamber's center sat a simple, unadorned pillar of dark material, and it was from this pillar that the pulse originated, steady and patient, as it apparently had been for thousands of years. As the landing team approached, the pillar's glow shifted, brightening slightly, and a new pattern of light began playing across its surface, one that after a moment resolved, unmistakably, into a star map. "It's reacting to us," Fessa said, cautious excitement in her voice. "This isn't a passive object, it's responding to our presence." "A beacon," Voss said quietly, studying the star map. "Reyes, does this match anything in our records?" Reyes worked his scanner for a long moment before answering, his expression growing steadily more astonished. I think this is a map of a much larger network. Look at these markers. There are dozens of them, scattered across a huge area of space, and they're not random. They're positioned in patterns that suggest they're all connected, part of some larger system." He paused, checking his readings again. "Captain, some of these markers overlap with locations in deep space that our own long-range surveys have flagged as having unusual, unexplained energy signatures. We assumed they were natural phenomena. I don't think they are anymore." Thune, watching the discovery unfold from orbit through the shuttle's live feed, felt a strange mixture of awe and unease settle over her. Whatever this network was, whoever had built it so long ago that all 4 of the gathered species had still been confined to their own home planets, it was clearly larger and older than anything any of them had encountered before. It was, she realized, exactly the kind of discovery that could just as easily divide 4 fragile new allies as it could bring them closer together, depending entirely on how they chose to handle it. "This changes things," Petch said quietly over the joint channel, echoing her own thoughts. "A discovery this significant, every government we represent will want a claim to it. This could undo whatever fragile trust we've built this past week." "It could," Voss agreed, her voice carrying down from the surface. "Or, it could be the thing that proves that trust is worth keeping. I have a proposal, if the rest of you are willing to hear it, and I want to say clearly that I am not making this proposal because it benefits humanity more than the rest of you. I am making it because I believe it is the only version of this discovery that does not eventually end in another war." "Go on," Thune said. "Whatever this network is, it clearly wasn't built by any one species claiming it for themselves," Voss said. "It was built to be found by anyone capable of finding it, and it responded to all 4 of us standing here together, not to any one of us alone. I propose we bring this discovery to all 4 of our governments jointly, as a shared find, with a formal agreement in place before any single government moves to claim exclusive rights to any part of it. No one profits alone. No one investigates alone. We build whatever comes next of this the same way we found it, together." There was a long silence over the channel, as the other commanders considered this. Thune thought of the unbroken faction still awaiting judgment back home, of the centuries of suspicion between the Kael'th and Orinth peoples, of how easily a discovery this significant could become the spark for exactly the kind of conflict all of them had spent the last week carefully avoiding. "I will bring that proposal to my government," she said finally, "and I will recommend it strongly." "As will I," Petch said. "The Vane Assembly cares more about fair trade than exclusive ownership," Ilsa said. A joint agreement, with fair access for all four powers, suits us better than a fight we would likely lose anyway. I will recommend it as well. Down in the ancient chamber, Voss allowed herself a small, genuine smile as she listened to the three alien commanders agree, one after another, to a path that asked them to trust each other with something far more valuable than a single unclaimed signal. Thank you, she said quietly, all of you. I know trust isn't something that gets rebuilt in a week, or even in a year, but this is a start. A better one than I expected, honestly, when I set out from human space 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks after the joint fleet first departed Threshold Reach, formal delegations from all four powers had begun the long, careful process of negotiating a joint agreement over the ancient network, a process that would take months, possibly years, to fully resolve. But the first step had been taken, and it had been taken together, rather than as four separate powers racing each other toward the same prize. Thuan stood on the bridge of the hollow tide as her fleet prepared to return home, watching the ashwake on her display one final time before the human ship departed for its own long journey back to human space. She thought about the ghost story she had grown up with, the warning briefings, the training simulations built around a devastating defeat 300 years in the past. She thought about the calm, unremarkable woman who had turned out to be exactly the person those stories described, and also nothing at all like what those stories had prepared her to expect. Marshal, Voro said from beside her. A transmission from the ashwake. Captain Voss, for you personally. The screen resolved, showing Voss one last time, standing on her own quiet bridge, ready to depart. I wanted to say thank you, Marshal, Voss said, for being willing to see past the stories. Not everyone would have been. You gave me reason to, Thuan said. I hope, when the next ship of yours arrives somewhere unexpected, the stories that go with it are a little different than the ones I grew up with. So do I, Voss said. That's rather the whole point, isn't it? Building something worth telling a better story about. She paused, and something warm and tired crossed her face, the expression of someone who had carried a heavy weight for a very long time, and had just set a small piece of it down. Safe travels, Marshal Thun. I have a feeling this isn't the last time our people will meet. I have the same feeling, Captain, Thun said. Safe travels. The screen went dark, and a few minutes later, the ashwake turned smoothly away from the gathered fleets and began its long journey home, alone once more, but no longer quite the same ghost story it had been when it first appeared without warning, at the edge of a quiet, forgotten system. Behind it, the three alien fleets lingered a while longer in the system, their commanders exchanging final words before each turned toward their own separate territories. Petcharillion found himself, somewhat to his own surprise, exchanging personal contact codes with Thun before his fleet departed, an informal gesture between officers rather than any official diplomatic arrangement, but one that felt, to both of them, like it mattered more than the formal treaty negotiations that would follow in the coming months. We should speak again, Petch said, before the official delegations get involved and turn all of this into careful, guarded language. I would rather hear your honest thoughts than a polished statement written by your government's diplomats. Agreed, Thuthun said, though I suspect neither of our governments will thank us for skipping ahead of them. Let them be annoyed, Petch said, with the particular satisfaction of a man who had spent 30 years being cautious, and was, for once, glad to have taken a small risk instead. Some things are worth a little annoyance. Ilsa Meth, ever practical, had already begun drafting proposals for what she was calling a preliminary trade framework, eager to have something concrete ready by the time the official negotiations began, so that the vain assembly would not be left behind, while larger, more militarily significant powers dominated the conversation. She sent Thun a copy before departing, along with a short, characteristically blunt message. Better to build the bridge ourselves than wait for someone else to decide where it goes. Thun kept both messages, Petch's easy warmth and Ilsa's practical ambition, filed carefully alongside her official mission report, a reminder that whatever came of the months of negotiation ahead, something real had already been built in the 9 days since the ashwake first appeared without warning. As her own fleet turned for home, Thun allowed herself one last look at the star chart, at the small, frozen planet now falling behind them, and at the space beyond it, where dozens of unexplained markers still waited, scattered across a network none of them yet understood. She thought of the ancient chamber, the pulse that had waited patiently for 12,000 years for someone capable of hearing it, and she wondered, not for the first time, what other old and patient things might still be waiting out there in the dark, ready to be found by whoever was willing to look for them together instead of alone. She thought, too, of Voss, 300 years old, and still carrying the weight of a war she had ended and never quite been allowed to forget, choosing again and again, in ordinary moments no history book would ever record, to build something gentler than the reputation that preceded her. It was, Thune decided, the quietest and most difficult kind of courage she had ever witnessed. The courage to keep choosing restraint long after the world had already decided who you were supposed to be. The Dominion fleet carried that thought home with them, along with the joint proposal, the captured unbroken crew awaiting judgment, and the first careful threads of a friendship that had begun, against every expectation, with a single warship arriving without warning, and an alien fleet that had already known, or believed it knew, its entire history. They would learn, in the months and years that followed, that history was rarely as simple as the stories made it seem, and that the most dangerous ghosts were often the ones most eager, when finally given the chance, to become something better than the fear that had once defined them.